Welcome to 5 after midnight, where darkness is upon us, and so are those that lurk within its shadows. Number 1.
So when I was pretty young, my parents bought a house. As the oldest, I got first pick of the rooms inside, aside from the master bedroom that my parents got. At this point, I didn't care to take the attic. I guess I was too young and too scared. It was too disconnected from everyone else. But I did want a lot of space, so I chose the second largest room. There are no windows on this floor, only inside the rooms. My room was at the end of the hall and was closest to my brother's room. And my brother also didn't sleep in his room, so it was empty other than a small bed. I still felt sort of disconnected from the rest of the rooms. Going to the bathroom in the middle of the night was sort of out of the question. This story is partially the reason for that. I've always had nightmares. Still to this day, I just don't have normal dreams. It's always something bad. I took a sleep aid the other night in order to get some quality sleep, and I had as close to a night terror as I've ever had. When I was younger, I couldn't control the fear in a dream the way that I can now. I would wake myself up with techniques that my mom taught me, and I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. So here I am, pitch black, sitting in my room, and I hear it for the first time. I get chills just thinking about this. I hear someone call me from down the hall. It was a fucking whisper. And then I hear more people. I'm actually getting physically upset right now just telling this. I know I have talked a lot about fear so far, but even as a child, I guess because of the nightmares and some of the other stuff I had seen in my life, I was pretty desensitized. I certainly didn't fear anything real, as it sounded like people. So I walk right up to my door, looking down the hall towards my parents' room, and sometimes they would close their door. And I hear them again. Come here, in here, over here. At least 10 people just whispering, and now I can tell where it's coming from. It's coming from my brother's bedroom. I looked over, and it's just pitch black in there. There is no light other than from my room and from the stairs leading down to the main floor of the house. So I called my parents, and they finally came after I screamed. And I told my mom what I heard, and she checked for me. It really didn't matter that she checked, though, because it kept happening. I would wake up, be it because I had to go to the bathroom, or wake up from a nightmare, and I would hear them calling me. It's difficult to get up to go to the bathroom when you're a child, and you know there are things down the hall that want you to go down the hall towards them. This went on for quite some time, and the insane thing is that it only stopped when I pulled my bed apart, took my dresser, and moved everything in from my room into my brother's room. So I made that room mine. I can't remember having a solid thought about making it my room. I just remember doing it one day all by myself, and my family didn't even know that that's what I was doing. And that's where that little story ended. It's the scariest story I have, and I can tell you that I still remember the voices. They were just as real as if someone whispered to me today. I'm pretty sure that I'm not crazy, and I know for a fact that I was fully awake. I can't explain it whatsoever.
Number 2.
We bought a gas station, and I owned and worked there for a short time. It was behind some small old houses, and it was in bad shape, and something about it just felt really off. Just a few blocks down the road was a cemetery, and my wife was a very superstitious person. She said she felt something was off at the place as well, since the first night we worked there. So there were two separate events that happened that I cannot explain. It was a warm night, and we had the doors wide open. Around 10 p.m., we began cleaning up, and I went to lock the doors. As I was pulling the doors shut, I noticed a guy running at a very high rate of speed towards the gas station. I assumed he saw me closing the door and wanted to maybe buy something before we shut down. So, I just stepped back and turned to let my wife know to not run the reports just yet. I turned around to greet him, and there was nobody there. I went outside and looked around, but nothing. I just shrugged it off and moved on. A few days later, we had shut down and my wife was running the reports. The place to park for the employees was a small space with the wall of the store on one side, a curb on the other, and a dumpster in front. There were no lights, so it was fairly dark. I get in the car to back it out. As I'm backing out, I'm checking my mirror, and suddenly a very tall guy is standing directly behind the car. He fit the description of the person I saw before. I freaked out, locked my brakes, and turned back, and there was no one there. I jumped out to make sure I didn't hit him, but there was no trace of this guy. This screwed with my head for a while, but it never happened again.
Number 3.
Alright, I've only told a couple of people about this story because it still freaks me the fuck out, but here goes nothing. Back in 2002 or so, I went with my youth group to do some service work and teach vacation Bible school at a small church. We stayed at the church for a week, painting fences and window frames, cleaning the grounds, and running a little day camp Bible school for the church's children. We mostly just killed time and had the run of this old Methodist church. It was a really great time, but one thing about it still haunts me to this day. After spending a week doing chores and babysitting the little tykes, we all settled down for our second to last night, our sleeping bags laid out on the pews in the big sanctuary room, and waiting to fall asleep. Then suddenly, slam! A few seconds go by, another slam! By this time, we were all jolted upright in the pews, just staring at each other. Another slam! From what seemed like the kitchen downstairs, and it got us rushing to the back of the sanctuary faster than you can imagine. Okay, so here's where things go from crazy to insane, and I start to question my whole reality when I think of what happened that night. So the two ladies were still sound asleep, and the 8 of us were all huddled together in the back of this giant, dark, spooky church sanctuary, wondering just what in the hell was going on. Then what sounded like a giant ripping or crumbling sound emanated from the very top of the huge vaulted ceiling, starting at one end and rolling down the spine of the roof to the other end. It sounded like the entire roof was being ripped off or collapsing. It was absolutely terrifying. It gives me fucking goosebumps remembering it. Now, this is what really got us scared as all hell and clinging to each other in absolute terror. Next, the most fucked up thing that I have ever experienced happens. We hear a young girl's voice singing, "Jesus loves you, this I know," coming from down the front of the sanctuary. I shit you not. It was so fucked up. It was like a little girl singing, talking the words in a loud whisper, like seriously the fucking creepiest voice you could possibly fathom. That sounded like it was coming from the entire wall, not just a single small source. I can't even explain how unearthly it sounded. We are all now downright spooked, confused, utterly helpless to all this crazy shit going on. Not crapping our pants terrified, but certainly in that place where you feel completely unable to rationalize what is going on. Even Jeff, a 30-year-old musician and youth pastor, was reacting to all this with near the same primal, uninhibited emotion that we 14 and 15-year-old kids were having. Then the final nail in the coffin. Slam! Slam! And again, and again, and again, this time in a rhythmic pattern, about once every couple seconds. Slam! 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 Still coming from downstairs in what could be the kitchen. At this point, the youngest kid, who was maybe 11 or so, was completely in tears, begging Jeff to let us sleep in his car. So this being just completely too much weirdness, Jeff decides he'll investigate downstairs. At this point, we have reasoned that if it wasn't something otherworldly, maybe the pastor of the church was messing with us or something, and it was safe to check out. After a minute or so, Jeff comes rushing back in, saying he saw the little girl out in the corner of his eye in the hallway downstairs. He said it looked like she went around the corner the moment he turned to see her. Then one more time, a little girl in a Sunday dress, then gone in an instant. I've never forget the unease in his face. He was so afraid. I know this sounds too strange to be real, but it is all true. Needless to say that this had us all so frightened that it took about an hour or two of turning the lights back on and nothing happening to get us to go back to sleep. The next morning, after explaining what happened to the deep sleepers who were understandably incredulous, we kept going over what happened, trying to explain it any way we could, even the feasibility of it being a prank, but we were always coming up empty. Then I got a stroke of genius. Next to the big kitchen downstairs, accessible from the dining area, was a boiler room for the church. A big old-fashioned boiler right in the center. Yeah, an old church. The door to the boiler room was a giant steel fire door that rolled open and closed. I remember from our exploration of the church that that door kind of slammed shut when you closed it, and it might be the source of the slamming noise. But if it was far too heavy for one man to slam it fast as we heard it. We decided to do a test. We had one person go upstairs to the sanctuary, and the rest of us slammed the door together as fast as we could. 2 different people confirmed that that was the sound that we heard, but 6 or so teenagers and 1 adult couldn't move it as fast as we heard it the night before. Next, we decided to investigate the room behind the front of the sanctuary where it sounded like the little girl's voice was coming from. It was clearly a storage room, lined with shelves full of boxes containing all kinds of documents. Church records, old newspapers, that kind of thing. Sitting on a table with the lid half off was a box of papers. One of the newspaper articles sitting on top was a story about a fire that had burned down the church in the 30s and killed a little girl. A fire at the church killed a little girl. This immediately got us all thinking ghosts and unfinished business and the like. Freaked us out so much we decided to try to get a confession of some sort of funny business from the pastor when she came to have breakfast with us. There wasn't so much as a smirk on her face. So we said we were looking at old clippings and asked if anybody ever died at the church. She said she had heard of the little girl that got sick and had her funeral at the church, but that was it. We were convinced it was the little girl's spirit contacting us. So after all this freaky shit happened, we came back home, and we hardly spoke of that night, and we were never really sure of what caused it all. It's been years since I've seen anyone from that church, and I want nothing more than to ask just one of them how they remember it. And yes, it could have been one crazy, huge prank, but I really don't think so. After everything that happened that night, I'm convinced there are things in the universe that we rarely perceive and can hardly explain. They just don't show themselves to frat boys with cameras in empty buildings. In the house my mom used to live in, we had a strange visitor. Or rather, my mom was a visitor in a house that a strange person used to live in. It started small. Tiny things, from batteries to toys, would mysteriously vanish from our sides, only to reappear tucked away in various locations throughout the house. As time passed, my mom would panic at hearing my brothers crying from their bedroom upstairs, only to discover that they were and had been fast asleep. One time, however, my youngest brother wasn't just crying, but he was screaming, not from sadness, but from sheer terror. The kind of terror that you can only imagine after seeing what lies in wait for you under your bed. My mom and I sprinted up the stairs, ready to tag team and kill whatever the fuck was up there. My brother was sitting in his bed, crying, bawling until his face was beet red. His blanket had been torn up from the bed and caught in the blades of the ceiling fan, some 12 feet from the floor. We managed to calm him down long enough to convince him to sleep. I stayed with him to make sure he was fine. Mom came up to check on us after a while. She had heard crying from downstairs again. For months this went on, and then, for some reason, it stopped. My mom had asked if I had heard anything from our roommate recently. I said no, and she said good. She told me that one night she let the boys sleep downstairs in her bed. She went upstairs and sang lullabies all night long. We never heard the crying from upstairs ever again.
Number 5.
I was alone in an elevator, and the lights began flickering. Then they went completely off. A few seconds later, the lights turned on again, and out of nowhere this very pale little girl just appeared there, eerily holding a doll. I was petrified, and things became worse after she slowly turned her face to me and screamed like she was going to eat my soul. Then the lights went off again, and after about 2 or 3 seconds, they turned back on and the little girl had vanished. Now I take the stairs.